The desert night was heavy with silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind moving through the canyon walls. In the dim glow of the fire, her eyes shimmered with defiance, a spark that refused to bow even when shadowed by uncertainty. She had seen men treat desire as conquest, as if a woman's soul were nothing but ground to be taken. But this moment was different. The Apache warrior who stood before her did not speak with hunger in his gaze, nor with greed in his hands. His words fell like an oath carved into stone. "I will not use you. I will honor you." The power of that promise unsettled her more than any threat could. Honor was rare in the West, rarer even than rain in the desert. She wanted to believe him, yet her heart hesitated, shaped by years of betrayal and longing. So she spoke the truth that trembled inside her chest, sharp as a blade drawn in the dark. "It is only desire." Her voice cut through the night, a confession and a warning all at once, daring him to prove that his words were more than the hollow echoes she had heard before. The flames flickered between them, casting their shadows onto the rock face like specters of the lives they had lived. She carried scars not just on her skin, but deep within, marks left by a world that measured women by what could be taken from them. He, in turn, bore the weight of his people's history, a legacy written in loss and survival, where trust was a currency too often betrayed. In that fragile space between them, the fire burned as both danger and possibility. It was not a story of easy love, nor of fleeting passion. It was a story born in the Old West, where every bond was tested by hunger, violence, and the endless pull of the horizon. Here, promises were rarely kept, and trust could cost more than life itself. Yet in that canyon, with the stars heavy above and the firelight dancing between them, his vow carried a force that could not be ignored. Thus began a tale that would defy the dust of the frontier, a woman who dared to doubt, and an Apache who dared to honor. Between them lay the question that would shape their destiny. Was it truly desire that bound them, or was it something fiercer, deeper, a force strong enough to carve its mark in a legend? The answer, like the fire between them, would not be tamed easily. The Apache's words lingered in the canyon like smoke from the dying fire. "I will not use you. I will honor you." For a moment, the desert itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see whether the weight of his vow could endure the silence that followed. She studied him with eyes sharpened by years of betrayal, searching for the crack, the false note, the hunger disguised as tenderness. Yet his gaze did not waver, steady as the earth beneath their feet, carrying not conquest, but conviction. She wanted to laugh, to call him a liar like the others who had crossed her path. Men who spoke sweetly when the night was dark, but left nothing but ashes come dawn. And so she spoke the only shield she knew. "It is only desire." Her voice was both defiant and trembling, daring him to admit that he, too, was no different. Yet when the words cut through the firelight, his expression did not falter. He accepted her doubt as if it were a weapon he had expected, one he would not raise his hand against. In the Old West, promises were dangerous things. They could shatter under the weight of hunger, fear, or the barrel of a gun. To vow honor was to risk your life, for the land respected only those who kept their word. The Apache knew this. His people had lived by honor, fought for it, and bled for it long before she had stepped into his firelight. That history lay in his voice, in the lines etched across his face, in the stillness of his stance. He was not offering desire. He was offering something far heavier, something few dared to give: respect. The woman's heart wavered, though her pride kept her chin high. She did not want to need his vow, did not want to let hope settle in her bones, for hope was a dangerous flame that burned too hot and too fast. Yet as the night stretched on, as the stars wheeled silently above them, she felt the fire between them shift. It was no longer just warmth against the cold. It was a force alive, daring her to believe that perhaps his words were more than air. And so the first lines of their story were drawn, not in passion or surrender, but in the fragile balance of defiance and trust. A woman who had learned to doubt, and an Apache who chose to honor. Neither fully believed in the other yet, but both knew the desert would not allow empty words to stand. Soon, the land itself would test whether his vow could endure, or whether her fear of desire would consume them both. The following day broke with the raw edge of dawn, the sky painted in strokes of crimson and gold. The woman rose early, expecting the Apache to vanish like a dream at first light. But he was there, tending to his horse, his movements calm, deliberate, as though his promise had not been words spoken in the firelight, but a thread now woven into his every action. She watched him silently, waiting for the mask to slip, for the hunger in his eyes to betray him. Yet when he glanced her way, there was no hunger, only patience. The trail ahead was long and merciless, carved into the earth by blood and dust. They rode together, though no words passed between them. In the West, silence often spoke louder than speech, and his silence was not of indifference, but of respect. He did not fill the air with boasts or flattery, nor did he demand anything in return for his company. Instead, he gave her space, letting her ride as an equal, not as a prize to be claimed. For her, this was both unsettling and disarming. By midday, the heat bore down mercilessly, and they stopped at a narrow stream cutting through the rocks. She bent to drink, her hands trembling, her body weary from more than just the journey. The Apache knelt nearby, but did not touch, did not intrude. Instead, he placed a piece of bread wrapped in cloth at her side, and stepped back. A gesture small as a whisper, yet louder than any declaration. To honor, he seemed to say, is to give without demand. Still, doubts lingered. She looked at him across the water, her voice sharp as the desert wind. Why me? Why promise me honor when all the world sees nothing but use? Her question was a knife, born of wounds too deep to heal easily. The Apache did not look away. Because honor is not given to those who are strong alone. It is given to those who have been broken and still stand. His words struck her like a bullet, not because of their weight, but because she recognized the truth within them. That night, as they camped beneath the open sky, her thoughts churned like restless winds. She had spent years believing she was nothing more than a shadow of other men's desire, a body to be claimed, discarded, forgotten. Yet here was a man who vowed something she had never been offered. Not possession, not fleeting passion, but honor. And though her lips still whispered desire, like a shield, her heart began to wonder if perhaps his vow could carve a story that even the merciless West could not erase. The third night found them beneath a crescent moon, the desert air cool and sharp, carrying with it the endless hush of the plains. She sat by the fire, tracing invisible lines in the dirt with her finger, lost in the weight of his words. The Apache sharpened his knife in silence, the rhythm steady, unhurried. Between them stretched a gulf of unspoken truths, her fear of being used, his resolve to honor. Neither moved to bridge it, yet the firelight made their shadows lean toward each other, as if the land itself willed them closer. She remembered men who had sworn loyalty before, only to turn their vows into shackles. The memory of broken promises cut deeper than any blade, leaving scars no eye could see. That pain had taught her suspicion, taught her to armor her heart with doubt. And yet, every time she tested him with silence, every time she braced for betrayal, the Apache answered not with demands but with patience. It was his quiet that unsettled her most, for in the West, men spoke loudly of honor but rarely lived it. The journey pressed them onward through ravines and dry valleys, where the sun scorched the earth and coyotes cried at night. Each hardship revealed another layer of his vow. When her horse stumbled, he steadied it without word or boast. When hunger gnawed at them both, he gave her the larger share, though his ribs showed through his skin. When danger loomed in the distant howl of riders, he rode ahead to shield her path. These acts were not grand gestures, but small truths, threads that slowly wove themselves into the fabric of her guarded soul. Still, she resisted. One evening, unable to bear the weight of her own doubts, she challenged him outright. What if all you feel fades with hunger or thirst? What if your honor breaks when desire burns hotter than your vow? Her voice was sharp, trembling with anger born of fear. The Apache met her gaze with calm steel. Then the land itself will judge me, and if I break, may the desert swallow me whole. His words rang with the kind of certainty that only those shaped by centuries of survival could speak. That night, she could not sleep. His vow haunted her, clashing with the shadows of her past. She wanted to dismiss him, to cling to the belief that all promises rot in time. Yet a seed had been planted in her chest, stubborn and alive. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, not if he would betray her, but if she was brave enough to believe that someone could see her as more than a body, more than desire, more than a wound disguised as a woman. The days stretched on, and with each mile, the frontier tested them harder. A storm swept across the plains, fierce winds tearing through their camp, scattering what little they carried. She fell, cut her arm on jagged rock, and the pain stole her breath. He was at her side instantly, binding the wound with his own cloth, his hands firm yet reverent, as though even her blood demanded respect. She expected impatience, perhaps a curse at her weakness, but instead, he spoke softly. Your pain is not a burden. It is proof you still live. She cannot answer him. No one had ever spoken of her wounds as anything but flaws. His words unsettled her more than the storm, striking places inside her she had long buried. Through the night, as the tempest raged outside their fragile shelter, she listened to his steady breathing, each inhale a reminder that he had not abandoned her when it would have been easiest to do so. The West was merciless, yet here was a man who chose to stay, even when storms tried to strip them bare. When dawn broke, the world was washed clean, the sky brilliant with light. They emerged into a land scarred by the storm, but alive. The woman stood taller that morning, her arm aching, yet her spirit strangely steadier. She began to see his vow not only in words, but in every action he carried, every choice he made. Honor, she realized, was not declared once. It was proven again and again, in the smallest and harshest of moments. As they rode on, her doubts did not vanish, but they softened, reshaped into questions rather than accusations. She found herself watching him not for signs of betrayal, but for truths hidden in the way he moved, the way he looked at the land, the way he never looked at her as anything but equal. And slowly, she began to feel something she had long denied herself: safety. Not safety from danger. The West never allowed that. But safety from being unseen, from being reduced to nothing but a vessel of desire. By the time the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, she realized that his vow had already changed her. She was still scarred, still guarded, but something within her had shifted. She had begun to believe, not entirely, not without fear, but enough to wonder if perhaps the Apache's words were not just a promise to her, but a promise to the land itself. And if the land accepted his vow, perhaps she could, too. The fragile calm they had built was soon tested by the arrival of strangers. As the sun sank low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson, 3 riders appeared at the edge of the horizon. Their movements were deliberate, their laughter carried by the dry wind, the kind of sound that marked men who thrived on fear. The Apache stiffened, his hand brushing the handle of his knife, his eyes narrowing with the instinct of a man who had faced too many ambushes to mistake coincidence for chance. The woman felt her chest tighten. She had seen men like this before, and she knew cruelty often traveled with them like a shadow. The riders dismounted, their boots sinking into the dust, their eyes sweeping over her first before turning to the Apache. Their smirks told the story clearly. They saw her as a prize, a token to be bartered, not as a soul to be honored. One of them sneered, his words laced with mockery. You've gone soft, Apache. A woman at your side makes you weak. She flinched, not at the insult itself, but at the memories it dragged back, times when men had spoken the same words before taking what they wanted. The Apache did not rise to their taunts. His voice was steady, calm like the earth before an earthquake. She is not yours to speak of. She is not yours to touch. She stands as herself, and I will honor her. The riders laughed louder, mistaking his restraint for weakness, circling like coyotes around wounded prey. But the woman saw the fire beneath his calm, the way his stance was not hesitation but control, the control of a man who would strike only when it mattered most. For the first time, she stepped forward herself, her voice cutting through the night. I'm not a prize, nor am I weak. If you see me as desire, you will see me as fire. The words surprised even her, but they rang true, carrying the strength she had found in the Apache's vow. The riders faltered, not used to a woman speaking with such conviction, not used to hearing defiance in a tone that carried no fear. The Apache's eyes flickered with pride, though his body remained coiled for the strike. The standoff stretched, tense and unyielding, until the riders spat into the dirt and retreated into the darkness, muttering threats that promised their return. The woman's heart raced, but she did not tremble. She realized then that the Apache's vow had done more than shield her. It had awakened something within her she thought long dead. She was no longer running from men who sought to use her. She was standing, unbroken, beside one who vowed to honor her. That night, the fire burned brighter than usual, as though it too celebrated the defiance that had been spoken. The woman sat close to the flames, her hands steady, her eyes reflecting not fear, but resolve. The Apache sat across from her, sharpening his blade in silence, but she could feel his gaze, steady, measured, filled with a respect she was still learning to accept. The memory of the riders lingered, but instead of fear, it left behind a strange strength, as if their threat had carved her spirit sharper rather than weaker. She turned to him, her voice soft yet firm. "You spoke for me, but you also let me speak for myself. No one has ever done that." The Apache met her words with a nod, as though such an act needed no recognition. Honor is not silence. It is giving space for the truth to be heard. His words sank in her chest, deeper than any promise of safety could. For safety was fleeting in the West, but respect, that was something rare enough to last. As the hours stretched, she confessed fragments of her past, pieces of the scars that haunted her. She spoke of the nights when her worth was reduced to shadows, when her voice was stolen by the greed of others. The Apache did not interrupt, did not try to soothe her pain with false comfort. He simply listened, the firelight catching in his eyes, holding her words as though they were sacred. For her, this was more than new, it was revolutionary. To be heard without being silenced, to be seen without being claimed. In turn, he spoke of his people, of traditions carved into the earth long before the West was taken by greed. He told her that desire alone fades, but honor outlives men, outlives scars, outlives even the cruelty of the land. His voice carried not boast, but truth forged by generations. She realized then that his vow had not been a fleeting attempt to win her trust. It was an oath born of something far older, deeper, stronger than either of them alone. By the time the fire burned low and the stars thickened overhead, she felt the shift within her more clearly than ever. The woman who had once whispered, "It is only desire," as a shield was beginning to see that perhaps, just perhaps, desire was not her enemy. When tempered by honor, desire could be more than conquest. It could be fire that warms instead of burns, light that guides instead of blinds. And with that realization, her guarded heart began to beat with something she had not felt in years, the first quiet spark of trust. The days that followed carried an uneasy calm, as though the desert itself was waiting for the storm to return. The woman rode beside the Apache with a newfound steadiness, her chin higher, her eyes sharper. Yet behind her strength lingered a quiet dread. She knew the riders who had retreated into the night would not remain shadows for long. In the West, men who thrived on cruelty always came back, and they came back angrier. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she asked him the question that weighed most heavily on her heart. What if they return? What if they bring others? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the flicker of fear she still carried. The Apache tightened his reins, his voice low and resolute. "Then we stand. And if we fall with honor, not chains." His words were not meant to soothe, but to steel her, to remind her that survival in the West was not promised, but dignity always could be chosen. That night, as the fire crackled between them, she could not sleep. She thought of the scars on her back, the laughter of men who had once called her nothing more than desire, nothing more than something to be taken. But she also thought of his vow, of the way he had shielded her, yet still allowed her to speak, to fight, to stand. It was then she realized that she was no longer the woman she had been when she first whispered, "It is only desire." She was more. She had been remade by his vow, and by her own defiance. The Apache watched her as she sat in silence, her face illuminated by the flames. He saw not weakness, but the quiet strength of someone who had been broken, yet refused to remain shattered. To him, she was not a burden to protect, nor a conquest to claim. She was a force, as fierce as the desert winds, and he honored her not because she was fragile, but because she was fire. He knew the riders would return, but he also knew that whatever came, they would face it together, not as master and possession, but as equals bound by choice. And so, beneath the endless sweep of stars, their bond deepened, not in promises of safety, but in the acceptance of risk. In a land where tomorrow was never certain, they found strength in the simple truth that they had chosen each other, even when the world seemed determined to tear them apart. That choice, fragile and fierce, was already becoming a legend the desert would not forget. The storm returned at dawn. Dust rose on the horizon, carried by the pounding of hooves. More riders this time. Their numbers doubled, their fury unmistakable. The woman stood beside the Apache on a rocky ridge overlooking the valley, the wind whipping her hair, her body tense but unyielding. Fear coiled in her stomach, yet it did not consume her. She remembered his vow, remembered her own defiance, and for the first time, she felt ready to fight not only for survival, but for the honor she had once believed impossible. The Apache studied the riders as they approached, his stance calm, his hand resting lightly on his bow. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. They believe strength is in numbers. They do not understand that strength is in spirit. His words settled into her bones, steadying her breath. She gripped the small knife he had given her days before, the blade glinting in the morning light. It was not much, but in her hands, it was no longer just steel. It was a symbol that she would never again bow to being seen as desire alone. The riders drew closer, their shouts carried by the wind, their laughter cruel. Yet as they climbed toward the ridge, what they saw stopped them cold. Not a man shielding a helpless woman, but two figures standing together, unbroken, side by side. The woman stepped forward first, her voice fierce as it cut across the valley. "I am not yours. I will not be yours. And if you see me as desire, then you will burn in the fire you awaken." Her words echoed like thunder, and even the desert seemed to still at her defiance. The Apache followed her with silence, raising his bow, his presence alone enough to promise death to any who dared approach. The riders hesitated, their confidence cracking under the weight of a truth they had not expected. The woman they thought to claim was no longer prey. She was flame, and the man at her side was not her master, but her equal, bound to her by a vow the West itself seemed to honor. The standoff stretched, the air thick with tension, until the riders spat into the dust and turned their horses, retreating once more into the horizon. Their defeat was not in bloodshed, but in shame, beaten not by force alone, but by the fire of a woman who had once been scarred by chains and now stood unbroken. And, as the echoes of hooves faded, the woman turned to the Apache, her breath trembling, but her eyes burning bright. For the first time, she did not doubt his vow. For the first time, she believed she was worthy of honor. The ridge was silent after the riders vanished, yet the air still pulsed with the weight of what had just unfolded. The woman's chest heaved, her knife still clutched tightly in her hand, but for the first time in years, her breath did not carry fear, it carried freedom. She turned to the Apache, her eyes searching his face, and in his steady gaze she found no triumph, no claim of victory, only quiet respect. It was then she realized the truth. His vow had not been to protect her from the world, but to remind her she was strong enough to stand against it. As they walked back toward their camp, the desert sun rose high, casting long shadows across the land. Each step they took together felt heavier with meaning. She no longer questioned whether his promise was just words, for he had proven it in the silence of his actions. She thought of the nights she had whispered that everything was only desire, her shield against disappointment, and felt the armor cracking. Desire was still there, yes, but it was no longer hollow, no longer poisoned by cruelty. It was tempered by honor, bound by choice, and strengthened by fire. That night, as the fire crackled between them, she spoke softly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with vulnerability. I believed for so long that I was nothing more than what men wanted from me. That was all they ever told me I was. But when you stood by me, when you let me speak for myself, you changed something inside me. You gave me back what I thought I'd lost." Her words hung in the air, fragile yet fierce, and for the first time, her heart did not tremble at being seen. The Apache leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the flames. "You were never only desire," he said, his tone low and steady. "You were always fire. The world tried to smother you, but fire cannot be owned. It can only be honored." His words struck deeper than any blade, wrapping around her wounds like a healing salve. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe, not just in him, but in herself. And in that fragile, powerful moment, she realized something she had not dared to feel. She wanted to live, not merely survive. She wanted to carve a future not defined by chains or scars, but by the choice to walk beside someone who saw her as more than a shadow. The desert had tested them both, but now it seemed to whisper its approval in the crackle of firewood and the sweep of stars. The dawn that followed felt different, as though the horizon itself had shifted. The woman woke to the sound of the wind rustling through the brush, carrying with it a promise of change. She looked across the camp and saw the Apache saddling his horse, his movements deliberate, his posture as unshakable as the mountains in the distance. For the first time, she did not wonder if he would leave. She knew now that his presence was not born of convenience or fleeting desire. It was born of a vow, one he had lived, not just spoken. She rose and walked to him, her steps steady despite the weight of her past. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but clear. "You said you would honor me, not use me. I believe you now, but I must honor myself too." Her words trembled with emotion, but they were strong, like iron hammered into shape. The Apache paused, his eyes meeting hers with a reverence that carried no claim, no demand, only respect. In that gaze, she saw not only what he had promised her, but what she had become, her own. Together, they mounted and rode into the rising sun, two silhouettes carved against the endless sweep of the west. The land remained cruel, filled with storms, hunger, and men who thrived on fear. But they were no longer shadows moving alone. They were bound by something fiercer than desire, something more enduring than fear. Their story was no longer about survival. It was about transformation, hers, his, and the bond forged between them in fire and defiance. The woman no longer whispered, "It is only desire." She carried instead a new truth. Desire without honor is chains, but desire bound by honor is freedom. That freedom, rare and wild, was theirs to claim, and it was a force even the desert could not silence. Each hoofbeat carried their legend farther into the horizon, into the whispers of the land, into the stories that would outlive them both. And so, the tale of the Apache and the woman scarred by doubt became more than a fleeting spark. It became a flame the West itself would remember. Not of conquest, but of respect. Not of chains, but of choice. And in the silence of the desert winds, their vow echoed on, to honor, not to use, to fight, not to break, to live, not merely to endure. In the end, the story of the woman who once whispered, "It is only desire," and the Apache who vowed, "I will not use you, I will honor you," becomes more than a tale of two souls. It is a reminder that in the harshest lands, where cruelty often speaks louder than kindness, honor can still shine as a force greater than fear. The West tested them with storms, with riders, with doubt and blood, yet what endured was not conquest, but a promise lived through action. Her scars, once symbols of what had been taken from her, became proof of what she had overcome. His vow, once dismissed as words carried by the wind, became a legacy written in silence, sacrifice, and unshaken respect. Together, they discovered that desire without honor consumes, but when bound by dignity, it transforms into something unbreakable. It does not chain, it frees. This story leaves us with a reflection as sharp as the desert wind. How often do we confuse desire with value, possession with love, silence with strength? The woman's journey teaches us that survival is not enough. It is the right to be seen, to be honored, that gives meaning to endurance. And the Apache reminds us that true strength is not in taking, but in protecting what is sacred, even when the world laughs at such a vow. Their legend is not a tale of easy romance, nor of victory without scars. It is a story of trust earned slowly, of courage rising in the face of cruelty, and of a bond forged not by possession but by choice. In a land where names fade into dust, what remains are the actions that prove a promise. And their promise was simple, yet eternal: to honor, not to use, to walk side by side, even when the desert threatened to swallow them whole. If this story stirred something in you, let it live beyond this moment. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps these legends alive. And if you want to keep journeying through the Old West, where every tale carries both hardship and hope, subscribe to the channel and leave your mark with a like. Each gesture keeps the fire burning, ensuring that stories of honor, resilience, and courage continue to echo across the horizon.